Come and sit, talk for a while. Say what you mean, nothing to hide. I can see that shine in your eye, laughing out loud with your beautiful smile.
Welcome back to Frederick's 5 Cent Philosophers Podcast. I'm Jason, and I'm here with a special guest,
Rob. Nice to meet you.
And we are coming to you this Halloween from a cemetery. And Rob suggested this spot because it has a really cool lookout, I think.
It does. It overlooks downtown Frederick. You can see the spires.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day today for it. A lot of sun, a lot of spires, and so we're also in a cemetery on Halloween, and which makes us think of our own mortality.
Death.
Amongst other things. But we were wondering about the meaning of life. We were wondering about our existence. And since things like this, occasions like this make you think about things like this, we thought it might be a good idea to talk about it. What do you think about the big picture for our culture?
Okay. As in the meaning of life, or
the fact that we all have different opinions and what that may cause as far as, like for individual meaning in life is one thing, but a societal or cultural meaning of life is a different thing. And if we have too many variation, is that too much of a good thing?
Maybe. I mean, well, I don't know what the quote is, but there's a quote somewhere that if you have too many choices, it's anxiety. So I would maybe turn that into, if there's many views on what the meaning of life could be, you as a person are probably going to be expected in some way by family or career or culture to adopt as your meaning of life something that might not actually be what you want to have as your meaning of life, which is then going to create angst,
right?
Or just sadness, or you're going to assume that there's no meaning to life because the meaning you've been told is the meaning doesn't ring true for you.
Right.
So I would think that'd create a depression.
Yeah. So it may be that it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if there's too much cultural pressure to conform to whatever that particular culture or subculture's meaning of life is, and it causes you an issue because that doesn't fit for you as an individual, and that could cause problems for you psychologically, sociologically. But also if there's too little and there's nobody conforming to anything, and you have no coherence for the state, country, whatever. If you have a like work, you mentioned work. For some particular jobs, you have to toe a particular line, and you can understand that because you got all kind of go in one direction. It may not be individuals within who don't have buy-in may go somewhere else to a different job because they don't have buy-in to that corporate culture or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that too, and that reminds me of the mouse utopia thing that you shared with me, because in that experiment where I think his name was Calhoun, put all the mice in this perfect life where they had all the food they could want, all the bedding they could want, they had plenty of space, they had mating opportunities, they had to not compete for food. And when they had mouse culture, I'm sure, before they were put into this utopia was, I need to find food, I need to protect my babies, I need to mate with a female mouse or a male mouse, and then all that structure and all that necessity provided this framework with which to live in, to give you something to work towards. And when those mice when they had everything guaranteed for them, they no longer had to strive for any of that, which then lost the meaning of what they were doing, which created, the collapse of the mouse society. They all went and died, basically,
Yeah. So when there is meaningful work, that creates a situation where people are fulfilled when they have meaningful work.
Yeah.
And when they have all their needs met, you have a situation where that psychological fulfillment from working for your food or shelter or whatever kind of that situation causes problems.
Yeah.
So if you're deprived, that could cause problems.
Yep.
Because obviously if you don't have enough food or shelter or whatever, that could cause problems. But if you have no need at all to work for your daily bread, so to speak, that creates psychological problems as well.
Which is interesting because Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know what that is?
Yep.
Basically says that as you get safety and then you acquire food and then you have some sort of love, or I'm not even sure the exact hierarchy.
Right.
But at the top is self-actualization, where okay, I'm safe, I feel provided for, I don't need for food and things. And then in that theory, then you have time to ponder the great things and become a more cultured person and focus on all the things that are going to better culture, which I suppose may work for humans theoretically, but for mice it certainly did not. You know, it was actually, things went in reverse, it seemed like, when they had the opportunity to self-actualize, they did not.
Right.
You know.
Right. I think that's predictive of human culture.
Yeah.
I think the same thing happens. So, like you were saying, in the mouse experiment, there was weird behavioral tics that would come up, where there was clicks, and there was people who wouldn't mate, and there was people who were violent, and even though there was no need to there was no need to work for the food or the mating or the housing or any of the things. They could just have whatever they wanted, but still there was this violence that came about.
Yep.
And some mice were biting and
Yep, and eating their young and segregating others. And I thought of that, the beautiful ones, which were the mice that self-segregated, went to their own area, and
didn't mate.
Yeah, they didn't mate. They obsessively groomed themselves, and they just sort of were totally separate from society. Were an interesting one because I think a lot of people these days, you know, and I don't know if it's fair to draw the analogy from the mouse to the human, seem like they are very much segregating themselves from society. They're entirely in their own little bubble, in their own little world. And I don't know where to go exactly with that statement, other than I feel like we may have sort of that going on these days, where there's people who just find interaction with everybody else to be not a necessity, and in fact a nuisance, and they become so self-involved that they are their own little universe, and they have no need or desire to go find a mate or to meet anybody else's particular standards, really. And that's a wonderful thing in a way, because it allows this person theoretically to self-actualize, but it's, again, I don't know if it's going to actually happen when you give these people the opportunity to isolate and focus on exactly what their mind brings them. I don't know if it's going to be a good thing in the end.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting psychological problem to if you don't have a meaning, like Nietzsche was talking about, because of the death of God, because of the Western culture's situation where they've largely, at least the intelligentsia, largely gave up on the idea of there being a God or participating in a religion or anything like that people would have to create their own meaning. And he talked about that as a possibility. And he said there would be a lot of bloodshed in the next century because of that process, people trying to figure out which way's north, because there's not that traditional religion that was going to keep them pointing in some direction. And he was right. There were World War I, World War II, millions of people dead, and not to mention Soviet Union and Maoist China.
Yep.
Upwards of 100 million people dead for ideologies that were kind of a replacement for religion. They were supposedly atheistic, but they in essence worked in some ways as a religion.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, true to a lesser extent even here, because and I can't give you the statistics, but in Europe the same, as people generally disavow religion and atheism becomes the main growing religion, or I don't know if you would not call it a religion, obviously, I feel like people are inadvertently replacing the church, which was a place to find solace or community or even, charity, and that's being replaced by the government, which is a much more distant,
It's not relational.
amoral,
It's not
entity.
relational. It's not personal. It's not relational. It's not even social. It's nameless, faceless, bureaucratic.
And to get the charity and to get the things, you don't have to actually even pretend to
Be a good
embrace
character.
the other part of the bargain. You
Right.
know?
To be a good citizen.
Yeah.
So you could theoretically, if it induced good citizenship amongst the people,
Yep. It
then
would be
you might have a place for it. But
fair trade. Yeah.
yeah. But when you have no relational accountability, people just do whatever.
Yep.
And not necessarily good citizens.
Yep. It's sort of like the Kitty Genovese story. Do you know that one?
No.
Kitty Genovese is an example in psychology textbooks from like the 30s or the 20s in New York City. And there was a woman, Kitty Genovese, who was getting sexually assaulted in an alleyway. And
everyone walked by.
yeah, people walked by, people looked out the window, and everybody
I didn't
made
know
the
the name,
assumption.
but I heard the story before.
Yeah, it was just the diffusion of responsibility. When there's a bunch of nameless people all sharing the same responsibility, everybody assumes the other guy's got it.
Yeah.
And then no one does the thing.
Tragedy of the commons.
Yeah. Nice house.
Yeah. Tragedy of the commons.
So is the Soviet Union and China the first examples of powerful countries that essentially have no, and I know us as a country, there is clearly a separation of church and state. There's no state religion. But there is, to a degree, Christianity or theism sort of intertwined with our country based on, the Constitution, Bill of Rights. And I know the religion is not enshrined in there, but you can see it reflected in it in some ways. Whereas I don't know a whole lot about Soviet history or Chinese history other than they are much more secular, modern countries. Is that a fair statement of those countries?
Yeah, I mean, they were set up. I mean, the Marxist ideology is that religion is the opiate of the masses, meaning that religion can be used to anesthetize people to the corruption of the capital markets that are oppressing everyone. I mean, that's the philosophy of that. It's that religion is a tool to be used to distract people from their best interests and materially in the market, and it would be best if the masses were running things such that everyone gets what they need and everyone does what they can,
which sounds a lot like the self-interest of the individual of capitalism working towards itself, which is sort of ironic, Doesn't that sort of sound like that a little bit?
Yeah, it's there are some, what I think are some good critiques about what happens institutionally with religion, especially. But it can be in any institution. It doesn't have to be a religion. Religious institution can be any institution. The corruption that happens in an institution with power, but it also works with whatever socialist or communist institution you have to distribute everything equally. There's going to be corruption axiomatically in whatever. If it's big enough to be able to do everything for everyone, then it's powerful enough to draw all the psychopaths to its ranks. So you have a situation where institutionally, whatever you're replacing, religion or anything else, corporations, labor unions, whatever it is, that whatever institution is that you have to try to ensure that everyone has everything they need, that means that's a very powerful institution, and it's bound to corruption. So I don't know if that rings true for you, or does that make any sense? Or
I think it does. I mean, it sort of goes back to, I guess, all power, absolute power, I don't want to say it's such a cliche, but absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
But also, who's watching the watchers? You know, like
Right.
once you have people who have that ability to control people's destinies and fortunes, there are, of course, those who are going to bribe those individuals or, you know,
Or threaten them.
exactly, and to get their way.
Carrots or sticks, one way or another, they're going to get what they want.
Yep. And especially because if everybody has to get equal, their human nature is such that you want to excel beyond. There's people who just are never going to be accepting equality with other people. They don't view themselves as equal to other people, and they aspire to greatness for right or wrong, and that isn't necessarily not be equality. You know.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the meaning of our lives. Very interesting question.
Is there a meaning at all?
And beyond that, beyond meaning personally, societally. So that's so if people have everything they need in a socialist, communist utopia, like little Mouseville exercise, will that really be enough? Or would people be in a situation where they're psychologically unfulfilled because they don't have meaningful work?
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to discuss?
Well, I would say, the parallel with that right now is we have a country that even the poor, and this is not meant to diminish the suffering of anybody who's poor, but largely the poor have nice shoes. And I know there's a lot of poor who are not in homes at all, and there's actually poor sleeping outside and dying of starvation and poverty, and that is not what I'm diminishing at all. But a lot of poverty in America does not look like poverty in 1840 or poverty in sub-Saharan Africa or poverty in rural India or something
Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, there's not actually poverty as in I wish I had some water and I wish I had some food. It's poverty as in I subsist on handouts, or I, can't buy what I want necessarily, as opposed to not having what I need to survive. And so we have a country that, for the most part, does not want for food or shelter. And we have today, I went to 3 restaurants in the past 3 months. I almost never go to restaurants. All 3 of them in the past month or so were really understaffed. They had 1 server, 1 or 2 waiters and waitresses. They didn't have enough cooks, and they were struggling to keep up with barely anybody in there. Like, I was in IHOP just the other day, and there was 1 waiter and there was 1 hostess, and but they're hiring, and there's a ton of people who need work, but people are not getting the jobs. And it's this weird thing that I don't think I've lived through a moment like this yet, where there's been a lot of people unemployed, and a lot of job openings offering sign-on bonuses and decent pay, and people are not biting for it. So they are not even looking perhaps for that fulfillment and meaning you can get from labor or a job well done. They're happy or content or satiated with just being as is, maybe being home. They have the internet, their TV works, their chair is okay, and that's sort of enough. And I think maybe like the mice who factionalize and end up in these weird sort of cut off, separated communities. I think a lot of people are doing that these days. They are sort of just isolating themselves, and they're drifting off into their own little worlds, which, that way lies madness, or that way lies greatness, or that way lies self-actualization. I don't know, but I would garner it's not going to work for a lot of people, because it's, to be alone with your thoughts is not necessarily a happy place.
People are bored and up to no good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see what you're saying with the way there's a lot of cultural tension because people don't really have interesting work, and all their needs are met, and they're kind of bored, and they're wealthy enough to have an opinion.
Yes.
So
I like that.
In in a lot of places where people are working hard every day just to survive, like you mentioned, some other parts of the world or other times within our own country, but earlier times, people were too busy to have an opinion. They had to work for their daily bread and couldn't really didn't really have the luxury of contemplating the existence of their meaning of life or the existence. And when we do, maybe we get into the culture war area where people are just finding surfacey things to fight about and pitting people against each other for seemingly very insignificant issues.
Yeah, and especially if, as I've been reading about existentialism, correct me if I'm wrong, but nihilism is generally everything's meaningless, life, pointless. Existentialism, more or less, you got to find your own meaning. There's not a meaning we're giving you, but the struggle to find the meaning is sort of the epitome of being a human, of trying to find out where your meaning is. And we have I think we live in a world where a lot of people think there isn't a meaning and there isn't a point, and the globe's warming and we're all going to die, and there's too many humans and we're all going to die, and any freaking reason we're all going to die, and so what's the point? And then they have to sort of struggle with, finding meaning with that backdrop is going to be, depressing, or it's going to go nowhere. It's going to make you hate everybody around you, or give up on the future. And when you don't have a positive view of the future for yourself or your kids, then that alone is, I would assume, highly depressing, and it's going to make you not want to take part in it. Why be part of the Mouse Utopia if it's all, that, you know?
That nihilistic outlook is depressing.
Yeah, it really is.
So how do you avoid nihilism?
Well, I would say the existentialist would say to find meaning in life.
Yeah.
Which, I guess that really is, not to go cheap there, but how do you even describe that better than, because if someone knew how to find the meaning of life, man, the game's over, we got it. But to tell someone to hunt for the meaning of life is, it's a hard thing to describe to do. You know, how would you, as a religious person, you're religious, right? But would you say you embrace existentialism as in the meaning of life is to find your meaning of life? Am I even using these words correctly here? Am I asking the question right?
Well, yeah, there's like we've mentioned throughout our talk, there are historically there have been religions for people that have kind of given that direction as to what the meaning of life is. Even if it's not the particular individual meaning of life, it's a general backdrop of meaning for humanity generally.
So then what's Christianity's meaning of life?
Well, there's lots of different answers for that, as there are many different types of Christians.
I figured this would be a tough question.
As there are many different types of Christians. So I'm an anti-institutional Christian. So I'm not what you might call religious in the sense that I view religion as bondage. And so I think that Christ came to free us from bondage. So I don't go in for the institutional baggage that the Marx critique of religion, where there's corruption in the ranks of different institutional Christianity, whether that be Catholicism or Lutheranism.
So you accept that as a truth just based on the fact that an institution is guaranteed to at some point become corrupt based on its own power?
Right, and I believe that's the exact message of Jesus, is to free us from that, and the philosophy, if you will, of Jesus is love and freedom, and love and liberty, and the having that relational accountability with folks, like we were talking about earlier, is I can invest in people, I can love people who I know in my family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, community, and I can have that relational accountability where I'm trying to help people are trying to help me, we're trying to get along with each other, and that communal concept that communism or Marxism purports to want to get to, I believe is at a local level and where you have social ties with and accountability, like I said, relational accountability, and the heaven, because there's a lot of heaven and hell talk in Christianity, religion generally, but especially in our culture, Christianity, I think is a very confused topic, because it's
up there.
Yeah, right. It's funny you mention that, because I was just reading the C.S. Lewis Discarded Image, and he talks about the medieval and the classical view of the heavens and the earth, and their conception of the universe and how it worked. And in a poetic sense, they viewed the earth as a disk and the heavens as the atmosphere, basically. And then there's concentric circles, the moon, the sun, the stars. There's these different spheres of the heavens that affect the earth. And in a poetic sense, that's what they were trying to get at, their understanding of how the universe is laid out. And of course, that bled into their spiritual sense of what things were, as well as the physical. In our modern scientific way of understanding things, it's superstitious mumbo jumbo. But no, it actually had meaning for them in a mythological sense, in a poetic sense, they didn't view it as we view it. It's hard for us to get in their mindset, because it's like we view things scientifically, whereas that's not how they were viewing things. And so it's this story way of interacting with the world, where it's a story, is something where the story is that the heaven, basically the utopia, that the Marxist utopia that people are trying to get to, or whatever, is something that is not attainable in our context. That's the point. And so I think that the by and by, the afterlife, the whatever, is a marker for us to understand that is not something that we can achieve in our context. It's not something that the Marxist utopia, we shouldn't shoot for something like that, because that's not for here. That's not for here. But we can show, we can give foretastes of that in starts and spurts in our local area. We can there's times when we can be good to each other in our local community, and that can be like a
So if I'm getting that correctly, the meaning of life, in your view, is to live a life such that you can get that little taste of heaven, as it were, by living a life in which you can, I don't know how to say this, I guess just
reach out to other people.
Yeah, love other people and live the life that Christ would hope you would live. And through that, then you could experience some of, I don't know if I should call it the joy or the fulfillment of living a good life. Yep. I don't know. That sounds a little bit too.
That's pretty good. That's pretty close. Yeah. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's you reflected back what I was saying pretty good, I think.
Okay. Now, if most, I don't know what the statistics are, but if atheism is the primary demographic among religions that's growing, what do you think it means for the world or for society that there's millions and millions of people who have no expectation of heaven, or no expectation of hell, or no expectation of any reward or punishment for any of their earthly deeds? Is that a guarantee for detrimental behavior, or is that just neither here nor there? Is that almost a like the game's up kind of a thing?
Well, it depends what they use. If it
to fill the hole?
Exactly. It depends what people use to fill the hole. If it's the type of thing we're talking about, a socialist or communist situation where you got struggle sessions in China during the Cultural Revolution, or
in Princeton, or now,
or the circular firing squad in Soviet Union, where you have to find the next scapegoat, because it's going to be you, so you got to try to make sure it's the other guy, because they killed the aristocracy.
Yep.
And then they went after the the wealthy, the merchant class. They went after the people who were like the capitalists, basically. Then they went after the people who were the labor union people. You'd think they'd be on the same side, but they have to go. You always have to have a scapegoat, a victim, and in that scenario. And so then they went after the socialists because they weren't communist enough. And so once they got down to expelling, farmers out into Siberia and starving millions of Ukrainians, there's less and less people that you can point to as the culprit of why we're all not having a good time here.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, it's like an acid that just keeps eating away at the society.
And it's amazing how it's 70, it's decades since it all began and got bad, and you still can't go to the store and find a label made in Russia, or turn on the TV and watch a program made in Russia. And I don't think that's only in America. I bet in Canada and Australia and South Africa and other countries it's probably the same. I don't know how much they export or how much their culture actually is exported. But I mean, when I have my Russian patients, I love to ask questions of them, because Russia is like this other world to me. There is clearly a barrier between our culture and economy and their culture and economy. And I would assume the world's culture and economy and their culture and economy. And I would assume, stemming all back from them. When you destroy your creative and productive class and they're gone, how long does it take you to actually rebuild a functioning, thoughtful, productive, culturally enriching modern society? I mean, maybe that is a ignorant of Russia view, and it might very well be wrong, but I'm constantly amazed
It's a good question.
how they are having almost no effect on the rest of the world in any way, despite they're huge and fully capable of having quite an effect on the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question. There's other places too. I think maybe Cuba or North Korea or some other spots in the world where they took the full communist red pill, blue pill, whatever that thing is.
That's the ultimate dichotomy there too, the North and South Korea satellite image. It's one of those things where like, oh, you can't not look at that and come away with they chose poorly.
Right.
South Korea is like a booming, almost a hellscape of capitalism, but then on the other side, it's like it's the exact opposite. It's there's 7 light bulbs and the rich people have them.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, that's been quite a wide-ranging discussion of topics there, Rob. But that was cool. It was a cool talk.
It was fun.
It was a cool talk. So thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure.
And so we'll see you guys later.